I found the engagement ring I never gave her, and everything came back. The weight of a diamond isn't measured in carats, but in the silence of the words you were too afraid to say. My name is Lucas, and I am 32 years old. The cardboard box was tucked away in the deepest recess of the closet, behind a stack of tax returns from 3 years ago and a tangled mess of obsolete charging cables. It was labeled Simply Winter, written in a Sharpie that had long since faded to a ghostly gray. I hadn't touched it since the day I moved into this apartment, a day defined more by desperation than by excitement. I was leaving behind a life that had imploded, and in the chaos of packing, I had shoved this box into the dark without a second thought, treating it like a radioactive material that needed to be contained. Moving day had arrived again, but this time, the atmosphere was different. There was no frantic escape, no running away from the ghosts of a relationship that had disintegrated. This was just a move uptown, a step up in the world, or so I told myself. The apartment was quiet, save for the rhythmic thud of packing tape sealing boxes. The dust motes danced in the late afternoon sun, indifferent to the emotional archaeology I was about to perform. I pulled the box out, the cardboard soft and yielding under my grip. There was a heaviness to it that had nothing to do with its physical weight. I sliced through the tape with a box cutter, the sound tearing through the silence of the room. Inside, nestled between a pair of wool gloves and a scarf that still faintly smelled of a perfume I hadn't worn in years, was the velvet box. It was a deep, midnight blue, the kind of luxurious fabric that begs to be touched. I knew what it was immediately. I didn't need to open it to know the contours of the object inside, the way the metal sat against the silk, the specific gravity of a promise that was never kept. My breath hitched in my throat, a sudden, jagged intake of air that sounded too loud in the empty room. I stared at the small box, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. It had been 4 years. 4 years of silence, of new routines, of trying to convince myself that the path I was on was the one I had always wanted. But holding this box, feeling the rough texture of the exterior, shattered that illusion in an instant. It was as if the last 48 months had simply evaporated, and I was back in that jewelry store, the lights too bright, the sales clerk smiling too widely, waiting for me to make a purchase that would define the rest of my life. I sat back on my heels, the hardwood floor hard and unforgiving beneath me. The dust swirled around my head, mocking my stillness. I reached out, my fingers trembling slightly, and lifted the velvet box from its cardboard grave. It was lighter than I remembered, yet it felt like it was pulling my arm down, anchoring me to a past I had tried so desperately to outrun. The logical part of my brain, the part that paid bills and showed up to work on time, told me to toss it into the trash bag sitting by the door. It was just an object, a collection of carbon and gold. It had no power. It was nothing. But as I flipped the lid open, the truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. The diamond caught the sunlight streaming through the window, exploding into a kaleidoscope of fire and brilliance. It was beautiful. It was perfect. And it was the most heartbreaking thing I had ever seen. The ring sat there, mocking me, screaming accusations of cowardice and regret. This wasn't just jewelry. This was the embodiment of a future that died before it took its first breath. This was the wedding that never happened, the house we never bought, the children we never named. It was the tangible proof that I had been willing to gamble everything, only to fold before the cards were even fully dealt. I closed the lid, the snap echoing like a gunshot, and pressed the box against my forehead, closing my eyes as the memories began to flood in, washing over the high walls I had built to keep them out. The memory didn't come as a trickle. It came as a tidal wave, crashing over the barriers of the present and dragging me back into a time when the world felt vibrant and full of promise. Suddenly, the empty apartment with its half-packed boxes faded away, replaced by the warmth of a cramped coffee shop downtown. The air was thick with the aroma of roasted beans and old books, a sensory anchor that pulled me back to the very beginning. Her name was Maya. Even now, thinking the name felt like running a hand over a scar. You know it's there, you know it's permanent, but you touch it anyway just to remind yourself that you survived the injury. I saw her face clearly, not as it might look now, aged and changed by time, but as it looked then. She was 23, just starting a job as a graphic designer, possessing a kind of manic energy that I found intoxicating. She had dark hair that refused to stay in a bun and eyes that held a skepticism about the world, which softened entirely when she laughed. I remembered the way we used to sit in that corner booth for hours, ignoring the passing of time, discussing everything from the merits of terrible science fiction movies to the terrifying prospect of what we actually wanted to do with our lives. We were two pieces of flotsam drifting in the same direction, and when we collided, the connection was instantaneous and terrifyingly strong. It wasn't just the physical attraction, though that was undeniable. It was the sensation of being truly known by another person. I could look at her from across a crowded room and know exactly what she was thinking, usually a sarcastic commentary about the decor or the other patrons. She was the mirror in which I saw my best self. Our relationship moved with the speed of a forest fire. Within months, we were inseparable. We were that couple, the ones who finished each other's sentences, the ones who friends rolled their eyes at but secretly envied. We navigated the messy, chaotic landscape of our mid-20s together, celebrating promotions and mourning failures, always returning to the safety of our shared apartment. I remembered the way the morning light used to hit her face while she slept, the way she stole the covers, the specific sound of her key turning in the lock at the end of the day. It was a domesticity that felt natural, effortless, as if we had been living together in a previous life. I recalled the exact moment the idea of the ring took root in my mind. It wasn't a grand epiphany accompanied by choirs of angels. It was a Tuesday evening. We were cooking dinner, something simple like pasta, and she was telling me a story about a difficult client. She was waving a wooden spoon in the air, animated and frustrated, and I remember feeling a surge of overwhelming affection, so potent it nearly knocked the wind out of me. I looked at her, surrounded by the steam of the boiling pot and the clutter of our small kitchen, and thought, simply, asterisk, I want this. I want this forever. Asterisk, the realization wasn't scary. It was clarifying. All the noise of the world, career pressure, familial expectations, the uncertainty of the future, quieted down. There was only the singular, shining path that led to her. I began to plan, not with a checklist, but with a quiet, burning determination. I started saving money with a religious fervor, skipping nights out, and canceling subscriptions, funneling every extra cent into a fund labeled the future. I researched diamonds until my eyes blurred, learning about cut and clarity and carat weight, obsessed with finding a stone that matched the fire I saw in her eyes. I felt like an architect drafting the blueprints for a skyscraper, convinced that if I just drew the lines straight enough, the building would stand forever. I was so sure. I was so blind. The perfect narrative I had constructed in my mind began to fray at the edges long before the dramatic conclusion. It happened slowly, like rust eating away at the underside of a car. You don't see the damage until the floorboards give way beneath your feet. In the case of Maya and me, the corrosion didn't come from a lack of love, but from the terrifying divergence of our trajectories. I wanted to be the architect. I wanted the stability, the house with the white picket fence, the predictable cadence of a life that followed the rules. I was working my way up in a corporate firm that valued structure and hierarchy, and I was slowly molding myself into the shape of the employee they wanted. I traded my old jeans for suits. I traded late nights at dive bars for early mornings at the gym. I thought I was growing up. I thought I was becoming the man she deserved. Maya, however, was not interested in the blueprint. She was an artist, chaotic and free-spirited, and as the years went by, the walls of domestic life began to feel like a prison to her. She didn't want predictability. She wanted experiences. She talked about traveling to Southeast Asia, about living in a van for a summer, about quitting her job to freelance, chasing inspiration wherever it led. To my younger self, these ideas were thrilling. But to the man I was becoming, The man with the 401k and the ticking biological clock for stability, they sounded like recklessness. The arguments started small. A disagreement about whether to spend our savings on a new couch or a trip to Europe. A tense silence over dinner when I criticized her for staying out late with friends instead of focusing on her career path. I began to use words like pragmatism and future-proofing, words that tasted like ash in my mouth but felt like armor. I watched her dim right in front of me. The fire in her eyes didn't go out, but it changed. It became guarded, hiding behind a wall of polite reserve. I remember the night I bought the ring. I had finally saved enough. I went to the jeweler alone during my lunch break, the transaction feeling illicit and secretive. I walked out of the store with a velvet box in my pocket, my heart racing with anticipation. I called her immediately, asking if she wanted to grab dinner. She declined, saying she had to work late on a project. I remember standing on the sidewalk, the city noise swirling around me, feeling a cold spike of loneliness. I had the symbol of our eternal union in my pocket, but she was too busy building a life that didn't seem to have room for me in it. I didn't listen to the warning signs. I told myself she was just stressed. I told myself that once I asked, once we were engaged, the trajectory would align. She would see the wisdom of stability. She would want the house and the life I was building. I was arrogant enough to think that a diamond could bridge the gap between two souls that were drifting into different atmospheres. I clung to the memory of that Tuesday evening in the kitchen, using it as a shield against the reality of our growing distance. I was in love with the memory of who we were, blind to the reality of who we were becoming. The night I planned to propose was orchestrated with military precision. I had reserved a table at the restaurant where we had our first date, a rooftop spot with a panoramic view of the city skyline. I arranged for the band to know our song, a cliché I would usually mock, but in my desperation for the perfect moment, I embraced it. I had the speech memorized, a heartfelt declaration of love and promise that I had rehearsed in the shower for weeks. The evening started well enough. Maya looked beautiful, wearing a red dress that I hadn't seen before, her hair styled in a way that suggested effort. We drank wine and ate appetizers, and for a while, the old easy rhythm returned. We laughed, we reminisced, and for a few glorious hours, I allowed myself to believe that the last 6 months of tension had just been a phase, a temporary storm that was passing. Then the bill came, or rather, the moment for the bill came. I signaled the waiter, my hand shaking imperceptibly as I reached into my jacket pocket to ensure the ring was still there. I was about to give the signal for the music to start, about to drop to one knee, when Maya reached across the table and took my hand. Her touch was cool, her expression unreadable. "Lucas," she said, her voice steady but soft. "We need to talk." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. I froze. The waiter was approaching, the check in his hand. The background chatter of the restaurant seemed to drop to a murmur. I looked at her and I knew. I didn't know the details, but I knew the outcome. The script I had written was being torn up in real time. I signaled the waiter away with a sharp, frantic wave. "What is it?" I asked, though I was terrified to hear the answer. She took a deep breath, her eyes searching mine. She looked sad, but there was a steely resolve underneath it. "I love you," she said. "I think I always will. But I can't do this anymore." I stared at her, my fingers still brushing the velvet box in my pocket. The physical presence of the ring suddenly felt obscene, a heavy secret burning a hole through the fabric. "Do what?" I whispered, playing dumb, stalling, trying to keep the door open just a crack longer. "This," she gestured vaguely between us. "This life, this plan. I feel like I'm shrinking, Lucas. Every day, I feel a little bit smaller, a little bit more like a version of myself that I don't recognize. You want a wife. You want a partner in this corporate ladder climb. And I don't know if I want any of that. I need to find out who I am when I'm not trying to be the person you need me to be." The silence that followed was deafening. I wanted to pull the ring out. I wanted to shout that I could change, that we could figure it out, that love conquers all. But the ring in my pocket felt like a chain. If I pulled it out now, it wouldn't be a proposal. It would be a bribe. It would be me trying to buy her compliance, to trap her in the life I had designed. And looking at her, Seeing the relief in her eyes despite the tears, I knew that forcing the issue wouldn't save us. It would only destroy the memory of what we had. I sat there, the weight of the unasked question crushing me. I nodded slowly, the movement jerky and unnatural. I realized then that we were standing on two different cliffs, and the bridge between us had finally collapsed. I didn't propose that night. I didn't say the words I had practiced. I paid the bill, and I drove her home in silence. The ring stayed in my pocket, a cold, hard lump of lead against my thigh. The weeks that followed the breakup were a blur of gray days and hollow spaces. Maya moved out with the speed of someone escaping a burning building. She took her books, her art, and her chaotic energy, leaving behind an apartment that felt cavernous and sterile. I sat on the couch that we had argued about buying, surrounded by the silence that I had claimed to want, and felt a profound, aching emptiness. I took the ring out of my pocket that first night and placed it on the bedside table. I stared at it for hours, watching it catch the glow of the street lamp outside. I obsessed over the what-ifs. What if I had just asked her sooner? What if I had been willing to go to Europe? What if I had chosen her over the career? The comfort, the plan? The ring became a totem of my failure, a mirror reflecting my own rigidity and fear. Every time I looked at it, I didn't see a symbol of love. I saw a weapon I had used against myself. I couldn't bring myself to return it. The return policy had expired anyway, but it wasn't about the money. Returning it felt like admitting it was truly over, that the story had ended not with a bang, but with a whimper. Selling it felt too transactional, a betrayal of the love that had once been real, even if it had curdled into something else. So, I did the only thing I could think to do. I buried it. I found a shoebox. I threw in the gloves, the scarf, a few photos I couldn't bear to look at, and the ring. I taped it shut and shoved it into the back of the closet. I told myself I was storing it, that maybe in a few years, when the pain had faded, I would find a use for it. But deep down, I knew I was hiding a body. I was sealing away the part of me that had believed in magic, in the grand gesture, in the idea that love alone was enough to conquer the fundamental differences between two people. Time did what it always does. It marched forward, indifferent to human heartbreak. I threw myself into work. I got the promotions. I bought the nicer apartment. I dated other women, smart, stable, sensible women who fit the life I had curated. They were wonderful in their own ways, but there was always a wall I couldn't breach, a part of my heart that remained offline. I compared everyone to Maya, not because I was still in love with her, but because she was the last person who had truly seen me, flaws and all. I became an expert at compartmentalization. I built a life that looked perfect on paper, a life that was exactly what I thought I wanted back when I was 25. But every now and then, usually late at night when the noise of the world died down, I would feel the phantom weight of the ring. I would remember the way the diamond caught the light, and I would feel a pang of grief for the future that never was. I grieved not just for Maya, but for the version of myself that died with that relationship. The dreamer, the romantic, the man who was willing to jump without looking. For years passed. The box gathered dust in the closet. The pain sharpened into a dull ache, then faded into a distant memory. I moved on. I really did. I convinced myself that the ring was nothing but a trinket, a relic of a boy I used to be. Until today. Until I opened that box and realized that while the years had moved on, the regret had simply been waiting, dormant and patient for the moment I would finally set it free. Sitting on the floor of my half-packed apartment, staring at the ring, the urge to see her was overwhelming. It wasn't an urge to reconcile. I wasn't delusional enough to think that 4 years of silence could be bridged with a piece of jewelry. But I needed to know. I needed to see that she was okay, that she had found the chaos and freedom she was looking for. I needed to know that my sacrifice, as painful as it was, hadn't been in vain. I needed closure, not for the relationship, but for the part of me that was still stuck on that rooftop. I opened my laptop, the screen blindingly bright in the dim room. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. It felt invasive, like reading a diary you know you shouldn't open. But I justified it. I was just a curious old friend. I typed her name into the search bar. The results were immediate. She was easy to find, or at least her professional footprint was. She had freelanced, just like she said she wanted to. Her website was a riot of color and creativity, showcasing illustrations that were raw, beautiful, and undeniably her. I clicked through the pages, a bittersweet smile spreading across my face. This was the Maya I knew, the one I had fallen in love with. Not the constrained version she had become in our final year together. I scrolled further, looking for signs of a personal life. And there it was, a photo dated 6 months ago. It was a candid shot of her on a beach somewhere, hair wild, laughing at the camera. But she wasn't alone. Her arm was wrapped around the waist of a man with a surfboard under his arm. He looked rugged, unpolished, the antithesis of the suits I wore. They looked happy. They looked free. A sharp pang of jealousy stabbed at me, followed quickly by a wash of relief. Seeing her with someone else should have hurt, and it did a little. But mostly, it confirmed what I already knew. She hadn't been running away from me. She had been running toward herself. This man, this life, it was what she needed. It was something I could never have given her, not without breaking myself in the process. I stared at the photo for a long time. I tried to imagine the life I would have had if I had proposed that night. I pictured the wedding, the house, the inevitable arguments over money and time and direction. I pictured the resentment that would have grown, slowly poisoning the love we shared. I realized then that the ring in my hand wasn't a symbol of a missed destiny. It was a symbol of a disaster averted. The breakup wasn't a failure. It was an act of mercy. We had saved each other from a lifetime of unhappiness. But even with this realization, the object in my hand still held power. It was a tether to the past. As long as I held on to it, I was holding on to the idea that I was the villain of the story, the man who trapped the bird. Or worse, the victim who had been abandoned. I needed to cut the tether. I needed to transform this object of regret into something neutral. I closed the laptop, the screen going black, cutting off the window into her world. I stood up, my knees popping in the quiet room. I picked up the velvet box and slipped it into my pocket. It felt different now. It didn't feel like a weapon or a burden. It felt like a task that needed completion. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, leaving the moving boxes and the dust behind. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't come back until the weight in my pocket was gone. I drove aimlessly for a while, the city lights blurring into streaks of neon and gold. My mind raced through the montage of our relationship, the first kiss, the last fight, and everything in between. I thought about the nature of memory and how we curate our own histories. We tend to remember the beginnings and the ends, glossing over the long, messy middle. But the middle is where the real life happens. The ring represented the end of our movie, the dramatic climax. But I realized I was finally ready to appreciate the middle, the messy, complicated, beautiful years we spent trying to figure it out. Eventually, I found myself parked in front of a small, nondescript pawn shop tucked between a laundromat and a bodega. It wasn't a place where you went to sell heirlooms. It was a place where things went to be forgotten. It felt appropriate. I walked inside, the bell above the door jingling cheerfully. The air inside smelled of stale tobacco and old metal. The man behind the counter didn't look up from his newspaper, just grunted in acknowledgement. I placed the velvet box on a glass counter. It looked out of place, elegant and bright against the scratched, dirty surface. The man finally looked up, his eyes narrowing as he took in the sight of a 32-year-old man in a suit selling a diamond ring in a dive shop. He didn't ask for the story. He didn't ask if it was a grandmother's ring or a divorce settlement. He just opened the box, pulled out a loop, and inspected the stone. "It's good," he muttered, finally looking me in the eye. "Clean." "I know," I said. My voice sounded calm, steadier than it had all day. "How much?" he asked. I looked at the diamond one last time. I thought about the savings I had depleted, the overtime hours I had worked, the dreams I had pinned to this carbon structure. I thought about the future it was supposed to buy. It was worth thousands on the open market, maybe more. But right now, in this dingy shop, its value wasn't monetary. Its value was in its absence. "Whatever you can give," I said. He named a price. It was insulting. It was a fraction of what I had paid. He saw the hesitation in my face, the instinct to negotiate, to cling to the value. But then I saw Maya's face in my mind again, laughing on the beach. I felt the phantom weight of the life I almost lived lift from my shoulders. "Deal," I said. He counted out the cash, grimy bills that felt heavy in my hand. I took them, folded them without looking, and put them in my pocket. I walked out of the shop, the bell jingling again, signaling the end of the transaction. The night air was cool, biting at my cheeks. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking up at the sky. The stars were obscured by the city lights, but the sky was vast and open. I reached into my pocket and felt the absence of the box. The space where it had sat was empty. My hand brushed against the stack of bills, and for a second, I felt a twinge of guilt, as if I had sold a piece of my soul. But then I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cold air. I hadn't sold my soul. I had sold a ghost. I had sold the idea that my past defined my future. I got back in my car and started the engine. The hum was familiar, grounding. I had boxes to finish packing. I had a move to complete. I had a life to get back to, a life that was imperfect, uncertain, and entirely my own. I drove away from the pawn shop, watching the city recede in the rearview mirror. The ring was gone. The regret was fading. And for the first time in 4 years, the road ahead felt clear.